Inequality in today's capitalism is far greater than in any other moment in history, far greater than in any other mode of production, so that if we take the accumulation of capital of one of the 10 wealthiest people in the world and compare that enormous amount of wealth with the poverty of one of the 9 million people who starve to death every year, we will get a far greater difference in terms of inequality, of the abyss that separates the poorest from the wealthiest, compared to the inequality in the France of Louis XVI, because if we compare the poverty of a poor French peasant with Louis XVI, we will get a difference which is far less than the difference between an Elon Musk, a Bill Gates, and one of the 9 million people who starve to death every year in today's mode of production. Similarly, if we were to take the poverty of a Roman slave and compared that poverty to the immense wealth of an emperor like Nero or Caligula or Julius Caesar or Octavian, we will get, again, a difference which is far less than the difference that exists today between the wealthiest and the poorest. Additionally, the increasing dependence of small producers, of petty bourgeoisie, of small capitalists to the financial capital, which is the one that lends the capital in money form, which is then used to open up businesses. The rise in the proletariat of Asia, so that China has today around 300 million proletariats, and that means the rise of relative surplus value, because in the 19th century what we found was absolute surplus value, that is, surplus value in the process of production of capital is the difference between the total value, which is human labor power objectified in a commodity and translated into price through the effect of money as the general equivalent, so that the general equivalent in Marxian terms is like a mirror that reflects the value which is human labor objectified in a commodity. The difference between the total value of a commodity measured in its price when it is commercialized and the salary which is given to the producer. So the capitalist buys means of production and buys labor power through salary. The proletariat then objectifies his human labor power, produces a commodity which has a certain amount of human labor power objectified in value. That value is then transformed into price when the commodity is commercialized, and the difference between that price, that total value, fruit of the labor of the proletariat, and the salary which the capitalist gives him, is that surplus value. That surplus value is that extra value generated from the labor of the proletariat, which is not paid by the capitalist in the salary, and which is therefore accumulated by the capitalist and used, some of it, to reinvest in the cycle of capital, and the other part of that surplus value is accumulated in the form of private property. Absolute surplus value means that the labor time is increased, what Marx calls surplus time, which is that portion of the working time of the proletariat which is not paid in the salary but which generates value that is then accumulated by the capitalist, used to reinvest in the cycle of capital or accumulated as private property, as profit. So by increasing the number of hours in which the proletariat works, the amount of extra value not returned in the salary is increased. Relative surplus value, on the other hand, has to do with the ratio between the salary and price of the commodity. And relative surplus value, after the conquest of a minimum of 8 hours of labor for most proletariats throughout the world, is what constitutes the form of exploitation imminent to the process of production of commodities. However, there are, of course, industries in today's world in which absolute surplus value is still a form of exploitation. Surplus value, therefore, as the characteristic form of exploitation of capitalism, that is, that the totality of value produced by the labor of the proletariat is not fully returned in the salary, but is accumulated by the capitalist. the increased centralized control over the means of production, wealth, science, natural resources, technology, so that in today's world, a handful of capitalists control natural resources, scientific technology, advancement in terms of what the Frankfurt School called technical reason, that is industry, engineering, science, technology, controlling as well wealth, the flow of capital, controlling even the fate of nations through external or international debt and through the neo-colonial dynamics of the world market. Together with an astronomical inequality between the poorest and the wealthiest, together with the exploitation through surplus value, together with what David Harvey calls accumulation by dispossession, which is a form of exploitation carried out, for example, through taxes, carried out through the expropriation that the financial capital carries out all the time, together with the increased dependency of petty bourgeoisie, of small producers to financial capital, together with the increasing speculation of fictitious capital, which causes crises to explode eventually and forces the neoliberal state to intervene by rescuing banks and capitalist firms with money recollected through taxes at the cost of diminishing the so-called welfare state, by diminishing education, investment in health, security and policies, by diminishing the quality of life, using the money gained from taxes to save banks, to save firms and companies that have gone bankrupt due to their irresponsible tendency to speculate with fictitious capital. Together with all of these elements in today's capitalism, we have the destructive use of science and technology, so that a good portion of scientific knowledge is applied for the creation of weapons of mass destruction. The United States has more than 600,000 nuclear weapons, Russia has more than 5,000, China has around 260 nuclear warheads. A sufficient arsenal to destroy all life as we know it on this planet. And together with nuclear weapons, we have biological and chemical weapons of mass destruction. Additionally, the destructive process of production of food in great industries, which effectively commercialize poisons, so that the different chemical substances used in the process of production of food, seeds, fruits, and various commodities which are essential and which are commercialized all around the world, cause different ominous effects on the health of people around the world, allow us to claim that today we find ourselves in a critical moment in history. Capitalism is destroying the environment. Capitalism is posing a direct threat to life on Earth through the production of weapons of mass destruction, which are literally waiting to be used when the next geopolitical conflict breaks out between NATO, Russia, or whoever it is of the superpowers which are just waiting to use those weapons of mass destruction. Capitalism is causing drastic, ominous effects on human health due to the commercializing of commodities which are essentially poisons, which are essentially chemical substances that destroy the human body in different ways, that destroy our quality of life. Capitalism has increased inequality. Capitalism has increased the forms of exploitation through surplus value, accumulation by dispossession, and in the neoliberal age, the state retires from its social responsibilities of health, of education, of pensions, etc., and intervenes using money gathered through taxes to save banks and firms, which, not satisfied with the profit obtained through the consumption of commodities, the profit obtained through surplus value, the profit obtained through accumulation by dispossession, want to obtain more profit and therefore speculate with fictitious capital, thereby causing different crises, like the crisis of 2008, which caused millions of people to lose their jobs, millions of people to lose their homes, millions of people to be experiencing a state which has no responsibility in terms of the guarantees, the basic guarantees of welfare through education, health and pensions, by making private the public sector and therefore increasing the dominion of capitalism through basic services which should have been given by the state but which have been turned into private businesses. Before such abysmal contradictions, like for example the fact that today capitalism has developed technology, science to an unimaginable degree, the contradiction that despite these technological developments and this scientific advancement, we have today more poverty, more inequality, worse life conditions, in the sense that the commercializing of commodities, which are the result of irresponsible processes of production that cause different impacts on health, increase the probability of heart disease, cancer and other diseases. The destructive application of all of this enormous organic composition, development of the forces of production, and in general the tremendous development and technological potential of capitalism for the purposes of war, for the purposes of destruction, for the purposes of threatening our future as a species on this planet, as well as destroying many ecosystems, causing many species to go extinct, and producing commodities which do not satisfy the real needs of the majorities, but which respond only to the capitalists' need to gain profit, and at the cost of human exploitation, exploitation in the form of surplus value, in the form of alienated labor, the form of dehumanized labor which turns the proletariat essentially into one-dimensional surplus value producing machines, the exploitation of the third world by the first world's capitalists in the context of how value is transferred from the technologically less developed capitals of the third world to the technologically more developed capitals of the first world, forcing the capitalists in the third world to increase the exploitation of the third world proletariat, decreasing the life conditions of people in Asia, in Africa and in Latin America. The frequency with which crises at a large global scale in the world market occur due to the speculation of fictitious capital, all of these elements which shine light upon the devastating contradictions of capitalism make it necessary, first of all, to have a theory that explains the process of production of capital, how commodities are commercialized, how capital flows, how the market and the world market function truly, the relationship between the forces of production, the real, authentic, non-fetishized, according to Marx's notion of commodity fetishism, social relations of production influence the sphere of culture and of politics, a theory which describes how crises occur, a theory which describes the dynamics of value, price, human labor power, use value, abstract human labor power, money, and that theory is the theory of value which Marx develops in Capital. That is why Marxism, in the face of postmodernist ideology, in the face of the bourgeoisie ideology in orthodox and heterodox economics, which have nothing to say at all about the real contradictions of capitalism and the real way in which capitalism works, that's why Marxism is so crucial today as a theory to understand how capitalism really works. And second of all, and most important of all, that theory must lead to a praxis that has the aim of revolutionizing the mode of production, of abolishing the centralized control over the means of production, over science, over technology, over natural resources, abolishing the destructive application of science and technology in the war industry, abolishing the irresponsible and health-destroying effects of the process of production of food, abolishing surplus value, abolishing accumulation by dispossession, abolishing neoliberal states which do not intervene except when there is a crisis to save banks, to save firms, and have no responsibility in terms of social security, in terms of education, in terms of pensions, in terms of health security. Abolishing the exploitation in the world market, which is neo-colonial in the sense that they don't have to invade like 16th century colonialism of Spain. They don't have to invade, for example, Latin America. They just have to exploit the capitalists of the third world, transfer value from those less developed capitals through treaties of neoliberal economy, which force the less developed economies to keep using less developed technologies, and therefore to have to resort to a greater exploitation of labor power in the third world, of the proletariat of the third world. To abolish inequality and poverty, the capitalist mode of production has to be radically transformed. Otherwise, the destructive application of science and technology is most likely going to destroy the planet. It's going to destroy most of the life forms that we know of, and it's going to leave the planet reduced to a nuclear winter wasteland.